How do you respond when people that you know don't follow the rules? How do you respond when you have a friend of yours and they come up to you and ask you for advice, and then you take time to consider it carefully what you say, and then you give them what would be really good advice, and they're absolutely unwilling to listen or implement what you say? What about those of you that are parents and you have one particular kid that isn't obeying the rules? They're not going along with the program. They're not acting like someone in your family member does. What about those of you that are work and you have responsibility over people and they're not doing what they were trained to do? They're not following the instructions that you clearly gave them, and they're not doing what you are paying them to do. How do you respond when people that you're charged with absolutely refuse to follow the rules? Is there a way to have a positive influence on people that you love? Some people have actually given up. They say, there's no way to get people to obey. I can't control anyone, so I'm just going to go completely to the opposite and not do anything. Is there a way to get people you are responsible for to change their behavior? Is it possible to get someone that you care about, somebody that you're in charge of, somebody that you have influence over, to actually change their behavior? I know lots of ways that don't work. These are strategies people have used on me and strategies I've used that were absolutely ineffective. I've tried labeling them. Those of you that have notes, did the ushers pass out the notes? Okay, right now would be a good time. You guys pass those things out. I want to warn you, Pastor Dan is like very sequential. So when you're taking notes from Pastor Dan, he will go in order. I make it a little bit more complicated. You have to kind of pay attention to what I say and then fill them in the right blanks, and they won't necessarily be in order. These are on your notes for those of you that like to take notes. What I've done in the past and what hasn't worked for me is labeling people, pointing out their mistakes, and telling them what to do. And I want you to think about this. Have you ever tried it with your kids? Your kids are not following the rules, and what you do is you label them, and then you go up to them, and then you point out exactly everything that they're doing wrong, and then you tell them what they need to do. That is usually not an effective strategy. Before I get into the sermon, I want to identify two groups of people that are in here. Some of you are rule followers, and you are already frustrated with me beyond belief. In your world, it's black and white. Behavior is either right or wrong. Rules bring order to a chaotic world. It's very important to finish your to-do list. If you have a to-do list, chances are you're a rule follower. You love structure, order, systems. You value organizations, detailed planning, and doing what is right. That's what rule followers do. And someone gave you notes, and you're already like 2 or 3 minutes behind. And how in the world could that be that you don't get a chance to fill in those blanks? Sorry. Others of you aren't worried about the notes. You could care less if people pass them out because you're not going to fill them out no matter what anyone says anyway. The world is many shades of gray. Rules are suggestions. This is not a misprint. Rules are suggestions that you may consider. It's important that people do not limit your options. You value creativity and freedom. You do not easily adhere to the status quo, and you know how to color outside the lines. Let me give you an example of the difference between a rule follower and a rule breaker. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, okay? You pull up to a light, and the light isn't shifting right, and no matter what, you never get the green. The rule followers will sit at the light for 2 or 3 different times, and they will have a dilemma. Do I break the rule, even though it's only 2 o'clock in the morning, or do I sit here and wait for one more time? Rule breakers, you aren't even there anymore. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, that light's not working, and you are long since gone. We're in a series called Lead Like Jesus. This is the 4th week of the series, and we're talking about leadership. Something that I want to make sure that we catch. I do also have something else in the notes for those of you that are rule followers and like that kind of order and structure. Before we get into the passage, it's important that you understand how the religious people saw the world. They saw the world as God. It was possible to please God, but in order for that to take place, certain things had to happen. You had to know the rules. These are in your notes, by the way, for those of you that like to keep notes. If you know the rules, avoid certain behaviors, and remain separate from sinful people, then you can be connected from God. They believed that God loved them and didn't like anybody else. And there was a way to be in and there was a way to be out. And if you were out on purpose. So that was the worldview that they had coming into the situation. I want you to imagine this scene. Here's Jesus. He's in Galilee, which is a little bit north in the northern part of Israel. And the religious people have come all the way up from Jerusalem because they've noticed that he's breaking a rule. I want to speak to rule followers for just a second. Every once in a while, there's going to come a situation in your life when the only thing that you can see is that person that's breaking the rule. You can't see anything past it, okay? You see a rule being violated, being broken, and there's something inside of you, there's this sense of justice that just desperately wants to make sure that they get punished or that somebody sets them straight. Depending on what kind of a personality you are, some of you are kind of kind and gracious and relational people, and you hope somebody else confronts them. Others of you have no problem going right up and confronting people for breaking the rules. Here are these religious people, and they know what's right. They know exactly how things should happen, and they see Jesus misbehaving. They see him breaking the rule, and they have to point it out. Watch what these religious people do to Jesus. Then some Pharisees, they were an elite group that kept themselves separate from everyone else, and the teachers of the law. They're the people that had most of the entire Old Testament memorized. They came to Jesus all the way from Jerusalem, and they asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They do not wash their hands before they eat." And it wasn't that they were unclean or they didn't have sanitary properties or they didn't understand about bacteria. It was about a religious ritual that they had to go through. Back in those days, if you wanted to be close to God, you wanted to be a holy person, you had to follow certain rules in order to be holy, and you had to make sure you went through the procedures. And if you didn't do that, you were nowhere near what God wanted you to be. And here these religious people are, and they are mad. Jesus is breaking the rule. How in the world are you breaking the rule? That's wrong. And they come up to Jesus and they say, "You're breaking the rule. You can't do that. That's wrong." And I love the way that Jesus responded to them. Instead of getting mad, defending himself, or doing the kind of stuff we normally do, watch what Jesus does. He replied, "Okay, I'm breaking the rule. Why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition?" I want to suggest the possibility to some of you, and it's going to be hard for you to accept. Are there some rules that should be broken? Are there some rules that you shouldn't follow? Jesus replied, "Why do you break the command of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is devoted to God, they're not to honor their father or mother with it. Thus, you nullify the word of the God for the sake of your traditions." What they did was they came up with a religious rule that enabled them to miss out on everything God wanted. God designed it so that children, as their parents got older, would take care of their parents. But these religious people came up with a system, a rule, that they didn't have to be held to that obligation, and they could take the money that they otherwise would have given to their parents and so devote it to God, and then everything would be okay, and then they could follow the rule and still be close to God. Now, Jesus is going to get intense. He's going to say some pretty painful words. Watch what he says. "You hypocrites, Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. About 700 years, Isaiah prophesied about the people, and he said, this is what he said, 'These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules.'" Their teaching is merely human rules. The religious people saw Jesus as a rule breaker that needed to be corrected. This is in your notes for those of you that like to follow the rules. They couldn't see anything else. Is it possible to be so focused on the rules that you could miss the Messiah? You see, these religious people were so intent on somebody breaking a rule that they couldn't even see Jesus in front of them. All they could see is, you're doing it wrong. That's not right. When it comes to interacting with people, if love is missing, then the entire experience is painful. I want you to let this sink in. When it comes to interacting with people, if love is missing, then the entire experience is painful. Jesus called the crowds to him. Here's Jesus. He's had this confrontation with the Pharisees, and then he stops, slows down the process, and he says, okay, I want all of you that are around to come and gather, because I'm about to say something that is profound and important, and you need to pay attention to it. Jesus called the crowds to him and said, listen and understand, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of the mouth, that is what defiles them. He's addressing their concern for him breaking that specific rule. Verse 12, then the disciples came to him and asked, I love this, there's some relationally attuned people, and they come up to him and they say, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard you say this? I can imagine them coming up, Jesus, you're offending these religious people. He replied, every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by the roots. Leave them, they are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. Jesus is saying that they don't even know where they're going, and the place that they're going to lead people to is destruction, and it's not actually helpful. Peter said, explain the parable to us. I love Peter because he's a lot like me sometimes, where I'm a little bit extroverted and I will blurt out things before I really think about them. The rest of us love people like Peter because they're willing to say out loud what none of us are willing to say but wish somebody really did. Peter comes up and he speaks on behalf of all the disciples and he says, you got to explain this to Jesus because I don't understand about things coming in and going out and about the heart, that stuff. Is there any way that you could make it more understandable to us? And I love Jesus' response, and the reason I highlighted this is because the disciples continually get from Jesus, you have little faith, you guys don't understand me, you're so dull. If I was trying to please Jesus and I continually heard that, it would be at least frustrating and would make me want to try harder. Watch this. Are you so dull? Jesus asked them. Don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out the body? But the thing that comes out of a person's mouth comes from the heart, and these defile him. He says, it's not what you put into your mouth that defiles you. There's something already inside you. And he explains it, and he says it's about evil thoughts. It's about judgmental attitudes. It's about being condemning. It's about thinking you're superior to anyone else. It's about wanting to fulfill your desires. It's about wanting to do them in really unhealthy ways. Watch what he says. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. These are what defile a person. But eating with unwashed hands, that does not defile him. It's not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside. There are things inside your heart that will actually defile you because they will come out in the way that you treat other people. Jesus was the master teacher, and he was taking his disciples and he was teaching them a leadership principle that if they got and understood, they could apply to life and it would change the way they related with everyone. And he wants to slow down and make sure they catch what he's saying. It's what's on the inside that matters, not what you do in your outward behavior. Your outward behavior will be a reflection of what's taking place on the inside. Now, the master teacher, Jesus, takes his disciples and he takes them all the way out of Israel. And he's going to give them a test. He's going to test a woman that he encounters, and he's going to test his disciples. One of the group of people fail the test miserably. Another one passes the test with absolute flying colors. If you're not careful, and if you don't connect these two passages together, you will completely misunderstand what Jesus is saying. Leaving that place, he wants to make sure that we know, because he starts by saying, leaving that place, then he tells you where you're going to go, and then he tells you exactly where it's at. Whenever the Bible tells you three different things, it's crucial that you don't miss where the context is of what's taking place here. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman, that's a person that they considered to be an enemy that had no value and no worth. She was an outsider. She was a Gentile. She was someone that the people on the inside thought had no value and were not important and did not really matter. A Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Imagine this woman. And she has this child, and this child has got this illness that has been taking place for years. And she's desperate. And I can imagine just the look on her face, because I know if something was going on with one of my kids, I would be so motivated to see if I could get Jesus to do something about it. And she walks up to Jesus and she says, "Is there any way that you can help me?" Watch what Jesus does. Jesus did not answer a word. He ignored her. I can imagine she came up to Jesus and she started talking to him and he just walked away. She followed him around and came up to him and said, "Jesus, could you help me?" And he turned and he just walked away. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps bothering us. Get this woman out of here. It is getting old having to listen to her beg you. It is wrong. Why in the world aren't you doing something about this, Jesus? Just tell her to get out of here." Some of you have been on the outside, and you know exactly how this woman felt. And people have labeled you because you didn't follow the rules. You didn't quite go along with the program. And some of you are in church because you care about people that are here, but you've already written God off. And when you see Jesus respond like this, it is painful to your soul because that's exactly how you feel. Some of you feel like you don't matter, you're unimportant, that you've been cast aside, that you don't have any importance. I want you to consider that maybe Jesus is wise, and maybe he's smart, and maybe he's trying to teach them something in a way that only silence and allowing people to respond would bring to the truth what is already on the inside. He answered, watch this because it gets more painful. "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. I wasn't sent for you. I wasn't sent for outsiders. I was only sent for the people on the inside." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me." I can imagine this woman. Jesus says to her, "You're on the outside, you don't matter. I only care about the people that are inside." And she comes up to him and she just kneels down. She says, "Lord, help me." Jesus was saying out loud what his disciples were feeling inside, and it was coming out. They had thought of this woman as a useless dog that didn't even matter. And they had cast her aside and said, "Get this woman out of here." And Jesus is saying out loud what's on the inside, and they're forcing the disciples to experience the pain of the moment. He replied, "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." We could do an entire sermon on how to respond when you're insulted. We could do an entire sermon about how to respond when people put you down, but that's not today's message. Then Jesus said to her, "Woman," watch this, "you have great faith. Your request is granted," and your daughter was healed at that moment. You see, Jesus is taking the disciples through a test, and he's taking them through the test, and they failed miserably. They had arrogant, judgmental, harsh, condemning attitudes, and Jesus was saying on the outside what they were thinking on the inside, and he was forcing them to come to grips with it. Now, some of you, when it comes to leading your children and your family members, and the people that you've been charged with in leadership, You can't figure out why you can't get them to follow the rules and do what you want. If your heart's open, you might just figure it out today. There might be something on the inside that's coming out on the outside, and it's absolutely undermining your success over and over and over again. I want to make sure that we don't miss how great this moment is. Jesus said to his disciples, "You have little faith," in Matthew 6, Matthew 8, Matthew 14, Matthew 16, and Matthew 17. He keeps saying to them, "You of little faith. You guys are dull. You're not catching it." And then all of a sudden, this Canaanite, outside woman that they think is a useless dog comes up to Jesus, responds in such a way that he says to them, "You have great faith." He is teaching all of them that there's something about this woman who you thought was worthless that actually knows exactly what it is I've been trying to teach all along. I want to kind of slow down a little bit and help some of you see what's going on the inside, so that you can change the way that you lead the people in your family and your friends and the people that God has charged you as your employees. The disciples saw the woman as an inconvenience that needed to be ignored. This is going to be hard for some of you to think about. But have you ever seen people as your family as that way? When you interact with the people on your job, are they people that are unimportant, without any value, that are slowing you down and keeping you from accomplishing your purposes? Remember, when it comes to interacting with people, if love is missing, the entire experience is painful. We are a product of the acceptance and the rejection we receive as a child. I want you to think about this for a second. Depending on what families that you grew up in, some of you grew up in families where you were accepted, where you were cared about, where you were affirmed, where you mattered. Other people, you did not experience the life-giving affirmation that can only come through acceptance, and you have a pain and a hurt and a longing in your soul. Did you know that we're all attracted to people that accept us? Have you ever thought about how you got your friends? Most of you didn't choose your friends. The way that you got your friends they are the people that happen to accept you, and you enjoyed spending time in their presence. Some of you are wondering why your husbands are so into work, and they spend all of their time and their energy in a place that's not at home with you. Could it be that the reason they want to be somewhere else is in that place they make a significant contribution? In that place, other people accept them for who they are and appreciate who they are. And at home, the only thing that they hear is the ways that they're not measuring up. I want to ask you to think in your own heart, are you drawn to acceptance? Do you push away from people who reject you? We are far more open to the people that accept us than we are the people that lecture us. I want to talk to you parents for just a minute, okay? When you see your child breaking the rule, what do? Do you ever go up to the child and say, "This is wrong"? Do they feel in your soul that you've labeled them, sized them up, measured them, and giving them a label that they don't want any part of? Some of you have been so focused on the rule that you forgot about the person. Sometimes I'm going to kind of admit a little bit of my own soul so that hopefully we can all see kind of how it works as a parent. When our kids obey us and do exactly what we say, it makes us look good, right? It makes us look really good when our kids obey us. And when they don't, it makes us look bad, right? And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we're more concerned about how we look than we are about the heart of our kids. I want you to be honest with yourself and think, how do you respond when your kids break the rules? Is it all about the rules? Is it about, you're not living in my house and doing that? There is no way I'm going to let you get away with that behavior and live with me. Can you imagine if Jesus was afraid of guilt by association? He would have stayed in heaven. We are far more open to the people that accept us than with people that lecture us. Have you ever wondered why your kids want to get their advice from their peers? No offense to you teenagers, it's not because they're smarter than the parents. It's because there's something about those peers that accept them for who they are. Good parents never elevate the rules above the relationship. There are going to be times, and maybe it hasn't happened to you yet, but there are going to be times when your kids disobey you and they don't do what you say. And you're going to be tempted to enforce the rules at the expense of the relationship. Please don't do it. I have families that come into my office and they haven't spoken to their kids in 15 years. And you ask them to unpack it. And it comes down to a rule that their kid was breaking and they were unwilling to compromise the rule. I just want to leave you with the principle, okay? If you don't know what to do, always preserve the relationship, okay? Always preserve the relationship. I want to say it again. Always preserve the relationship. Just think about this. Do you want to have influence over your kids for their entire life or over this one issue? Some people sacrifice the influence that they can have over their kids over one issue and one rule. Please see the big picture on this. Always preserve the relationship. Isn't that what God did with us? Can you imagine God coming down from heaven and saying, wrong, wrong, wrong? He came down from heaven and said, I love you in the midst of your rebellion. And even though you're making choices that make me look bad and dishonor who I am, I love you anyway. How do you lead like Jesus? You refuse to elevate the rules above the relationship. And some of you might just figure out why you're having a hard time leading people for a long time. Could it be that you don't maintain your influence with accepting, understanding, and compassion? People are willing to go in a different direction if at first they feel like they've been heard, cared for, and understood. When your kids are not following the rules, are you demanding that they step into line, or are you caring about what's going on inside them? Treat the people that you've been charged with to lead with dignity, respect, because they have inherent value. Jesus gave us some profound principles. Some of you are wondering why you don't have any influence and why people don't want to be around you. Could it be that you're labeling them as someone who needs to be corrected? Or you're treating them as if they don't have any dignity and value or worth? I would encourage and challenge you as you consider leading the people that God has entrusted you with, to do it in such a way that gives them dignity and value, and you overwhelm them with acceptance, compassion, and understanding. Would you pray with me? Dear God, I know there's some parents and some leaders that are wrestling with what I said. God, give them the courage to consider that maybe there's a different way that might be with more wisdom than the way that they're implementing it. God, I pray specifically for the rule followers, that you would help them see that there are some rules that are more important than other rules, and rules are important. And they do bring order. But God, give us the wisdom to follow the rules that will honor you. God, for the rule breakers and the rebels that are in this room, I pray, God, that you would allow us to care enough about other people to realize that when we run roughshod over the rules, it does not help people's hearts. God, help us to realize that all rules should not be broken, and some rules are valuable and will bring us to the place that we can only get there by submitting to them. God, help us to be willing to submit to the rules that matter. God, I pray for people that have pushed you aside because they've been treated poorly, and they've been labeled and told what to do. God, give them the ability, like that woman, to see past the pain to what they truly desire. In Jesus' precious and holy name, amen.